Frescalone stood atop the crystalline ramparts of Outpost Zeta 9, his hardened outer shell gleaming under the violet light of the binary stars overhead. As he surveyed the desolate battlefield before him, littered with the charred remains of human assault vehicles and the broken bodies of their soldiers, a sense of smug satisfaction settled in his core. Another glorious day for the Fres Imperium, he chittered to his subordinate, Fres Dexal. How many human waves did we repel today? Fres Dexal's outer casing rippled in a gesture of amused disdain. 3, Commander, each more pitiful than the last. They persist in hurling themselves against our energy barriers, as if sheer stubbornness could overcome superior Fres technology. Frescalones allowed himself a moment of pride. The humans had been trying to breach this sector for months, yet the Fres defenses remained impenetrable. It was almost comical, watching these tall, soft-bodied creatures scurry across the battlefield like insects, only to be vaporized by Fres plasma cannons or disintegrated against the energy shields. At just over 3 feet tall, Frescalones knew that humans found his kind unintimidating at first glance. With their rounded bodies and tough, bark-like exterior, the Fres had been likened to ambulatory acorns by human prisoners. But appearance, as the humans were learning, could be deceiving. Commander, a young soldier named Fres Xylos approached, his shell still smooth with youth. The latest intelligence reports have arrived from High Command. Frescalones accepted the data crystal, inserting it into the receptor at the base of his shell. Information flooded his consciousness. Casualty reports negligible for the Fres, catastrophic for the humans, resource allocations, strategic assessments. All pointed to one irrefutable conclusion: the Fres were winning this war, and winning it handily. It seems the human leadership grows desperate, Frescalones announced to his officers. They're pulling forces from the Orion front to reinforce this sector. They still believe they can break through our lines. He let out a series of rapid clicks, the Fres equivalent of derisive laughter. As night fell and the binary stars dipped below the horizon, Frescalones retired to his command pod. He allowed his outer shell to relax slightly, basking in the nutrient mist that filled the chamber. Tomorrow would bring more human assaults, more futile attempts to overcome Fres superiority. And Frescalones would be there, as he had been for the past stellar cycle, to send them screaming back to their primitive colonies. Just before he entered his regenerative cycle, a stray thought crossed his mind. The humans had proven surprisingly resilient for such a technologically inferior species. Time and again, they had adapted their tactics, invented new weapons, found ways to survive where any logical assessment said they should have perished. But in the end, Frescalones reminded himself it wouldn't matter. No amount of human ingenuity could stand against the full might of the Fres Imperium. Their victory was as inevitable as the rise of the binary stars. As he drifted into unconsciousness, Frescalones allowed himself to imagine the accolades he would receive when this war was finally over. Perhaps they would erect a monument in his honor, commemorating the Fres commander who broke the back of the human resistance. Little did Frescalones know that far above, in the inky black of space, human ships were approaching. Ships carrying a cargo that would soon shatter his world and rewrite the very nature of this interstellar conflict. The first hints of trouble came in the form of fragmented transmissions from the Epsilon sector. Frescalones was in the middle of his daily tactical review when Fres Xylos burst into the command center, his outer shell vibrating with agitation. Commander. Urgent communique from Outpost Epsilon 12, the young officer chittered, his words tumbling out in a rush. They're under attack, but something's different. The humans are using. It doesn't make sense, sir. Frescalones felt a flicker of irritation. Calm yourself, Fres Xylos. What doesn't make sense? Speak clearly. Fres Xylos took a moment to compose himself before continuing. Sir, they're reporting that the humans are using primitive weapons. Bladed weapons, sir. Swords. For a moment, the command center fell silent. Then, a ripple of clicking laughter spread through the assembled officers. Frescalones himself felt his shell quiver with amusement. Swords? Against our energy barriers and plasma cannons? Surely this is some kind of joke, he said, his tone dripping with derision. But as the days wore on, similar reports trickled in from other fronts. Each told a similar tale: humans clad in heavy armor, wielding archaic melee weapons, somehow managing to breach Fress defenses that had previously been impenetrable. Fress clones dismissed these stories as desperate human propaganda, a pitiful attempt to demoralize the superior Fress forces. Yet, he couldn't quite shake a growing sense of unease. Preposterous, he muttered to Fress Dexol during a private strategy session. Next, they'll tell us the humans are training attack trees or some such nonsense. Fress Dexol's response was measured. With all due respect, Commander, perhaps we should not be so quick to dismiss these reports. The humans have proven unpredictable in the past. Fress Colones felt his shell harden with indignation. Are you suggesting that we, the mighty Fress, should fear humans with swords? I expected better from you, Fress Dexol. Despite his bravado, Fress Colones ordered increased surveillance of the surrounding space. If the humans were indeed planning something, he was determined to be prepared. It was Fress Silos who first spotted the anomaly. A cluster of human ships, approaching on an unusual vector. Their energy signatures were off, somehow muted. Scan them, Fress Colones ordered, a hint of worry creeping into his voice despite his best efforts. The results were puzzling. The ships were heavily armored, more so than usual human vessels, and their cargo bays. The readings made no sense. Instead of the expected energy weapons or explosives, the scans showed large quantities of metal. Refined metal, shaped into long, thin forms. Impossible, Fress Colones whispered, his outer shell paling slightly as the implications sank in. As if to confirm his worst fears, a transmission crackled through the command center. It was from Outpost Gamma 7, the nearest Fress stronghold to their position. This is Gamma 7. We are under attack. The humans. They've breached the perimeter. They're inside the barriers. How? How are they doing this? They're cutting through our troops with swords. We need reinforce. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Fress Colones felt a sensation he had never experienced before: fear. Cold, paralyzing fear that seemed to seep through his hardened shell and into his very core. Battle stations, he heard himself say, his voice sounding distant and strange to his own ears. Prepare for imminent attack, and send word to High Command. Tell them. He paused, scarcely able to believe the words he was about to utter. Tell them the humans are coming. And this time, they have swords. As klaxons began to blare throughout Outpost Zeta 9, Fress Colones stared out at the starfield, watching for the first signs of the human ships. Whatever was coming, he had a sinking feeling that all his advanced weaponry and impenetrable barriers might not be enough to stop it. The sky above Outpost Zeta 9 erupted in a dazzling display of light and fire as the human ships breached the atmosphere. Fress Colones watched from the command center, his outer shell quivering with a mix of anticipation and dread. This was not the usual human assault pattern. Where were the massive dropships? The swarms of fighters? The relentless barrage of missiles and energy weapons? Instead, smaller, heavily armored craft descended rapidly, evading the Fress anti-aircraft fire with surprising agility. They landed just outside the range of the outpost's main defensive barriers, disgorging their cargo with military precision. Magnify, Fress Colones ordered, his voice tight with tension. The holographic display zoomed in, and for a moment, Fress Colones thought there must be some mistake. The figures emerging from the human craft were bizarre. They were encased in bulky, gleaming armor that made them appear even larger and more intimidating than usual. But it was what they carried that truly defied comprehension. Swords. Actual, metallic blades, glinting in the harsh light of the binary stars. A ripple of disbelieving clicks and whistles spread through the command center. Fress Dexol voiced what they were all thinking: they can't be serious. This is madness. Fress Colones felt an unexpected urge to laugh. After all their technological advancements, after all the devastating weapons they had faced, the humans had resorted to this? It was almost pitiful. Activate the primary barriers, he ordered, a note of smug confidence returning to his voice. Let's show these primitives the folly of bringing blades to an energy fight. The massive energy field sprang to life, a shimmering wall of pure power that had repelled countless human assaults. Frescalones allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Whatever strange strategy the humans were attempting, it would break against their defenses like all the others. But then, something impossible happened. The armored human figures charged forward, their swords held high. Frescalones waited for the inevitable. The humans would be vaporized the moment they touched the barrier, their primitive weapons useless against Fres technology. Except they weren't. To the utter astonishment of every Fres watching, the humans passed through the energy barrier as if it wasn't there. Their armor seemed to shimmer and flex, somehow absorbing or deflecting the massive energies that should have annihilated them. Impossible, Frescalones screeched, his composure finally breaking. How are they? His words were cut short as the first human warrior reached the Fres front lines. With a swing of its massive sword, it cut through 3 Fres soldiers as if their hardened shells were made of paper. Panic erupted among the Fres ranks. Their energy weapons, so devastating against unprotected human flesh, seemed to glance harmlessly off the advanced armor of these new attackers. And when the humans closed to melee range, the Fres found themselves woefully unprepared for close combat. Frescalones watched in horror as the battle quickly turned into a rout. The proud Fres soldiers, who had sneered at human infantry for so long, were being cut down by the dozen. The sound of metal slicing through hardened Fres shells filled the air, punctuated by the screams of the dying and the war cries of the human warriors. Fall back, Frescalones heard himself shouting, though it felt like the words were coming from someone else. Regroup at the secondary defense line. Activate all reserve units. But even as he gave the orders, Frescalones knew it was too late. The impenetrable defense that had held for months was breached in a matter of minutes. The unstoppable Fres war machine had finally met its match, not in some technological marvel, but in humans wielding swords and shields like their ancient ancestors. As he watched his carefully constructed defenses crumble, Frescalones felt something fundamental shift within him. The certainty of Fres superiority, the bedrock upon which he had built his entire worldview, was shattering before his eyes. And the battle was far from over. The human warriors, their armor stained with Fres ichor, were advancing on the command center. Frescalones realized with a start that he was about to come face to face with these terrifying new adversaries. For the first time in his military career, Frescalones found himself preparing not for victory, but for survival. Alarms blared throughout the command center as Frescalones frantically coordinated what remained of his forces. The sounds of battle drew ever closer, the clash of metal on hardened Fres shells, the hum of energy weapons firing uselessly, and the terrifying war cries of the human warriors. Fres Dexol. Status report, Frescalones demanded, his usual composure shattered. Fres Dexol's shell was pale, a sign of extreme stress in their species. Sir, we've lost the outer perimeter entirely. Our troops are in disarray. These humans, they're not just breaching our defenses, they're slaughtering our soldiers. Frescalones felt his core churn with a mix of fear and fury. This couldn't be happening. The Fres were superior in every way. How could humans with primitive weapons be defeating them? Activate the internal defense grid, he ordered. Flood all corridors leading to the command center with plasma. That should stop them. For a moment, hope flickered as the sounds of battle seemed to recede. Then, horrifyingly, they resumed, louder than ever. Impossible, Fres Xylos chittered in panic. They're walking through the plasma fields. Their armor is resistant. Realization dawned on Frescalones. The humans hadn't regressed to primitive warfare. They'd combined their ancient techniques with technology advanced enough to counter the Fres's greatest weapons. It was a level of ingenuity he'd never anticipated. All personnel, prepare for close combat, Frescalones announced, his voice steady despite the terror gripping him. We are Fres. We will not fall easily. The door to the command center buckled under a tremendous blow. Again and again. On the 4th strike, it crashed inward, revealing a nightmarish sight. A human warrior stood in the doorway, its armor scorched and dented but still intact. In its hands, it held a massive sword that hummed with barely contained energy. The helmet retracted, revealing a face that seemed to Frescalones both barbaric and terrifyingly intelligent. In the name of humanity, the warrior's voice boomed, "Surrender." Frescalones felt something snap inside him. With a screech of defiance, he charged at the human, his clawed appendages extended. He was a Fres commander, and he would die before he surrendered. The human's movement was blindingly fast. The sword arced through the air, and Frescalones felt a searing pain as his outer shell was breached for the first time in his life. He tumbled to the ground, leaking vital fluids. As he lay there, watching his fellow Fres either surrender or meet a similar fate, Frescalones was struck by the horrifying truth. The Fres had become complacent, reliant on their technology. But these humans, they had taken the best of their past and their present, becoming something more dangerous than the Fres could have ever imagined. The human warrior approached Frescalones, sword pointing at what passed for his throat. "Do you yield?" the human asked, voice firm but not unkind. In that moment, looking up at this impossible combination of past and future, Frescalones realized that everything had changed. The war, the balance of power, the future of both their species, it had all shifted in the span of a single battle. With his last conscious thoughts before the darkness took him, Frescalones reflected on the irony. The Fres had dismissed humans as primitive, only to be defeated by weapons from humanity's ancient past. They had been winning the war against the humans. Then the humans brought swords, and nothing would ever be the same again. Frescalones awoke to a world irrevocably changed. The sterile white of a medical bay greeted his bleary visual receptors, a far cry from the command center where he had made his last stand. For a moment he thought perhaps it had all been a vivid hallucination brought on by combat stress. But the dull ache in his mended shell and the human guard at the door served as stark reminders of the new reality. "Ah, you're awake," a human voice said. A tall figure in a white coat approached a human doctor, Frescalones presumed. "How are you feeling, Commander?" The use of his title surprised Frescalones. "I function," he replied cautiously, "though I do not understand. Why am I not a prisoner or dead?" The human's face contorted into what Frescalones had learned was a smile. "The war has changed, Commander. We're here to talk, not to conquer." Over the following days, Frescalones learned the full extent of what had transpired. The attack on Outpost Zeta 9 hadn't been an isolated incident. All across the front, human melee Marines had broken through Fres defenses thought impregnable. The proud Fres military, once on the verge of victory, was now in full retreat. But more shocking than the military defeats was the response of the Fres High Command. They had sued for peace. Impossible. Frescalones chittered when he was informed. "The Fres do not surrender. We do not negotiate with inferior species." "Perhaps," replied Fres Silos, who had survived the battle and now acted as liaison between the human forces and the Fres prisoners, "it is time we reconsider what we deem inferior." The humans, it turned out, had no interest in subjugating the Fres. They spoke of peace, of cultural exchange, of a future where both species could coexist and learn from each other. It was a concept entirely foreign to the militaristic Fres society. As he recovered, Frescalones found himself engaging in long conversations with the human soldiers and scientists. He learned that the swords were actually highly advanced weapons, channeling energy fields that could cut through almost any material. The armor was a marvel of human engineering, combining cutting-edge technology with designs inspired by their ancient warriors. But why swords? Frescalones asked one day. Why revert to such an archaic form of combat? The human captain he'd been speaking with laughed. Because it was the last thing you'd expect. Your defenses were designed to stop energy weapons, missiles, even psychic attacks. But good old-fashioned steel, enhanced with our latest tech. That was our ace in the hole. Frescalones felt his outer shell ripple with a new sensation, not fear or anger, but something akin to respect. The humans had outthought them, using the Fres's own arrogance against them. As the weeks passed and negotiations between human and Fres leadership continued, Frescalones found his worldview slowly shifting. The unshakable belief in Fres superiority that had been ingrained in him since birth began to crack, replaced by a growing appreciation for human ingenuity and adaptability. He thought back to the moment when the first melee Marine had burst into his command center. At the time, it had seemed like the end of everything he knew. Now, he was beginning to see it as the start of something new, a future where the Fresh and humans might stand together rather than in opposition. The day finally came when Fresh Colognes was to be released. As he prepared to leave the human medical facility, the guard who had watched over him throughout his recovery approached. "You know," the human said, "I think you Fresh and US humans have a lot more in common than either of us realized. We're both stubborn, both proud, but we're also both capable of change." Fresh Colognes considered this for a moment. Perhaps, he replied, "that is a lesson worth learning, even if it took a sword to teach it." As he stepped out into the sunlight of a world forever changed, Fresh Colognes reflected on the strange twists of fate. The Fresh had been winning the war against the humans. Then the humans brought swords, and in doing so, they had not just defeated the Fresh, they had opened the door to a future neither species could have imagined. It was, Fresh Colognes decided, a future he was curious to see. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.
Like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep creating amazing content for you.